So welcome everyone to our weekly call. I hope you all had a fantastic weekend. Today we're going to cover two main topics. Depending on whether they're on, we will look at a particular aspect of the split horizon internet draft, which I think Dan and Kevin will sort of talk to for a few minutes. So we'll cover that first. And then I'm going to just walk through some of the key points from the private relay paper, which I sort of completed a couple of weeks ago, and we timed out on the call last week. So as promised, I'll pick that up and talk about that. But first things first, I'm not sure if Kevin or Dan is leading off, but hopefully one of you is.
Yeah, I can kick off, Andrew. Can I share my screen?
We should be able to. So yeah, give it a go, and hopefully that will work.
Right, hopefully that's visible to people.
Yep.
Magic. Okay, so just to clarify and to disappoint anyone who thinks this might be all about the split horizon draft, it's actually not. It's rather something which came up as a result of those discussions. So this is talking about whether or not it makes any sense whatsoever to look at using special use domain names to indicate that the network DNS should be used. Okay. So as a starting position, we've got access networks. When I say access networks in the context of this presentation, I'm talking about cellular, mobile network operators, fixed ISPs, satellite ISPs, okay? Now, these networks often host private domains. I know that we do in Vodafone, for example, for things like customer account dashboards, a customer being able to top up their credit and not being charged for the data back and forth to do that, all that kind of thing, and other customer-facing network services, including most famously recently, multi-access edge computing, or edge, hosted within the network, not on the internet. So these are private domains, and they require operator DNS to be resolved. If you attempt to resolve them on a public DNS, there will be an error, and the behavior which follows that is inconsistent. It may be, for example, that if an operating system has configured a internet public resolver to use, a DO resolver, for example, it may be that if that throws back an error saying, I can't resolve this, that automatically the network resolver is then tried, because the assumption is, okay, this must be a private domain. I'll see if the network DNS can do it. But that's not consistent. So in order to inform the clients that these private domains require a network DNS resolution, so the split horizon draft that Andrew mentioned, which Dan and Tiro have worked on, and I've helped with some of the editing. So that goes some way towards this. It uses provisioning domain keys for this purpose, and it allows networks to indicate you should use the network DNS only. And that's effectively a flag placed in the public DNS record. So a public resolver looking up that record can see it and can inform the DNS client to use the network DNS. Now, this requires round trips. It requires the security handshake, the connection setup, the round trip back and forth for the answer. I'm wondering, can network DNS be selected for a private domain without needing these? And so the idea to discuss, sounded this out with Dan, who's given some very, very good advice, but we thought it would be worth just asking people here before it gets taken any further, in case we're missing something spectacularly obvious, which means it's not worth pursuing. So special use domain name, RFC 6761, domains registered by IANA for special purposes. And most famously, you've got things like local, example, onion, etc. Yeah, you can't just buy these if you're a public entity and try and use them for your own company, etc. They have a special purpose, hence the name. So the thinking was, if you had something like .access as being reserved for access networks, and it was restricted to genuine private domains on those access networks, then could that be used to effectively flag that need for network DNS to be used without requiring round trips to a public resolver? In other words, if any other DNS configuration saw a dot access, it would immediately know there's no point going to a public resolver for this. I need to use the network DNS. So that's my open question. Any and all thoughts and comments welcome. Actually, just before I say that, Dan, if there's anything I've missed there, then please leap in and fit in.
No, that was the big stuff. Cool.
Thank you. Cheers. So open to the floor.
Okay, so anyone got any thoughts or comments? Or any prior experience, indeed, of looking for a special use domain name previously?
This has been discussed a lot over the years. And there's almost always some political landmine about saying that a certain thing is reserved and will not be allocated by IANA. And I suppose if we could overcome that, then you could say, yeah, there are some special use domain names which are expected to be treated incoherently, in other words, differently by every single full resolver that you talk to. Is that the castle you are storming here?
Yeah.
Sorry. The castle I'm storming is trying to unmute myself on Zoom. There you go. Probably, yeah. I mean, I suspect this is as much political as anything else. In fact, when we were originally discussing it, Dan and myself, I had the domain .carrier, and Andrew pointed out that could be even more politically incendiary, shall we say, because of history with carriers and how some people perceive them. So yes, I agree. I think it would be the political part would be difficult. I'm also wondering if there's something technical which I've maybe missed or which could preclude this.
No, there's nothing technical. There is a thing that is close to being technical, and I'll talk about that in a second. That's DNS security and its implications. But it's sadly necessary right now that the namespace be unified. And you can only add new things at the top, right? If you wanted to create a new local use domain that was at the bottom and it was underneath whatever example.com, you would say only the example.com people would need to give their permission to that, but that would not be universally reserved, and therefore it would have about the same status as SPF records. And so we're really talking about adding things at the top. And when you add things at the top, we've already got a number of meshed registries. I don't want to say conflicting, but you think about the ISO 3166 country code space, where .us, .uk, and so forth are able to be assigned by the United Nations, possibly by ITU. I'm not sure exactly what part of the UN apparatus does that, but the policy of the IETF, which is under the umbrella of the Internet Society and which has a contract with the ICANN to operate IANA, sort of the whole policy, I hate to call it a chain, could we call it a chain ball? The policy chain ball that is the IETF and its management of this says things like, well, two-letter codes are left entirely up to the United Nations. We're not going to allocate any of those. And at some point, one-letter codes got reserved, .A, .B, and so on. And those got treated. I don't remember what the treatment was, but I know there was money involved. And then there's a huge number of GTLDs, right? It used to be that to get .goo or Goog or Google to work, you actually had to be inside the Googleplex. You had to be using one of their recursive servers. Now it works everywhere, and they paid a lot of money for that. And so there is a whole apparatus that is part of that chain ball that says, you know, we understand how to allocate those names, and whether to allocate means to allocate it and assign it to somebody, or, as in your case, to allocate it and reserve it so that it cannot be assigned. All of that has got a long list of people who think it is their job to say no unless everybody else says yes. And so cracking that nut is hard. I dare say the DNS op working group has gone to bat for that. Every year since it has existed has, by and large, always been blunted. It's always been turned into something that doesn't mean what anybody wanted it to mean, because that's what consensus looks like. So I would say this would be terrific if it could be done. But unless you know a trick I don't know, or unless you're willing to start from, you know, a position of, you know, relative goodwill and assume that it could possibly be done if we just ask one more time, I think that's great. I wish I wore a hat so I could take it off to you.
Well, there has been a draft going through the DNS op for quite some time. I think at least 2 years, called Top Level Domains for Private Internets. So it might be worth you taking a look at that. But I think that's with a lot of discussion.
I am counting that draft and its discussion and its gradual turning toward uselessness as part of my summary. Yeah. But I did promise a technical tie-in, and that has to do with DNSSEC. Because now that the root is signed, any validating resolver anywhere has to deal with the fact that it might want to have some names that it answers for, which are, not part of the NSEC chain for the root zone. And so for those of you who haven't been rolling in this particular bag of rice recently, DNSSEC has authenticated denial of existence. This may be a mistake, but it's too late to fix if so. And what that means is that if you get a negative answer that is signed by the authority for that zone, you'll get not only an indication that the name you asked for doesn't exist, but a proof, which is to say no name which lexicographically falls between this name and that name exists. And here's my proof of that span of non-existence. And so that proof is a signature on the NSEC record. And what that means is if you wanted to offer .access, .carrier, I don't know, save me from politics. If you wanted to do that, then the participating resolver would have to sign that separately. You would have to, because if you ask the root about it, or if any of your stub resolvers are also stub validators, as would be true of a Dane resolver, if they become aware of the non-existence proof for the name that's being introduced, then they won't ask you for it. They'll just assume it doesn't exist. You are allowed to use a negatively cached span of that kind if it validates. Now there are fixes for this, and they are in wide use because this type of name is in wide use. For example, inside of various sort of large multinationals, they just don't use DNSSEC because they need to amend the namespace, and they don't want to deal with all this horse shit because it only really matters for things that are accessing external resources, and we've got proxies for that, so we don't need this. That would be one fix. Another fix would be to hardwire it into the all of the participating resolvers that a given stub might be able to reach, which is, being able to reach means something differently in an ADD or DOH world than it used to. But what you could do is just say, if you ever ask the appropriate question of the appropriate participating full resolver, you will get an answer. You will not get any DNSSEC information about that answer. And so unless you happen to ask a nearby question that's in the same span but isn't the name you asked for, then you'll never know that span existed. But that's a pretty tenuous thing. So what this draft that Jim Reed was just referring to has discussed and gotten wrapped around the axle of is, well, clearly it has to exist. It has to be not in the span. It has to be something where there is no span of negativity, which proves that the name we wish to reserve does not exist. We have no way to do that unless it has a record type, which in turn means it has to have NS records. And the NS records would then most likely, it depends on who you ask and when, also have to be inside of the reserved name or in a different reserved name so that the participating full resolver, when it is talking to its cooperating stubs who don't bypass it with ADD or DOH, would all say, I see that there is a delegation, I see that it's signed, and I see that there is supposed to be a key, and I see what the name servers are. And so just then ask that question. But of course, that question would then be answered inside the same naming regime that they're in, and therefore there wouldn't be a conflict. But this is really, it's pretty tricky. Now, as hard as that is, as difficult as it's been to discuss it, and as hard as it is to imagine ever stopping that discussion, the political problem is harder. That's why I didn't lead with the technical problem.
Thanks, Phil. Great feedback.
So good luck. I can see Brett has been channeling his inner Glaswegian, which is always good to know.
It was Brett, Paul, not Jim.
I'm sorry.
It's all right.
Easily confused. All right, John, you've raised your hand.
Yeah, thanks. I guess I need to understand, Kevin, a little bit more clearly what the concept is, because I might be missing something, and this does tie into what Paul was just talking about. Is the proposal to make stub resolvers, when they see a request for .access, use a different set of resolvers? Are you talking about a development question, that you're saying that the stub resolver says, oh, this is .access, I should not use my encrypted public resolver, I should use whatever was given to me by the network? I'm not sure when the transition happens here.
Yes, that sounds like a good description of the flow. Yeah.
Okay, so you're actually talking about having people that write stub resolvers programmatically change where they send their queries based on essentially the TLD.
Yes.
Okay, so that's where I also see some potentially really nasty security problems happening. Because as an example, how do you, if you're enforcing a security regime with encryption, do you then create the stub resolver? Does the stub resolver then go through a secondary encryption process to talk to the network resolvers, which are supporting that .access TLD? You're forking that, and again, that's where things like DNSSEC and security of do I trust the .access resolver set? Also, you're just going to have a huge challenge getting stub resolver authors to do that, I think. Obviously there's 3 or 4 big ones, but that's a heavy rock to lift, I think, because of the potential security downstream issues with it. I like the idea. Again, I'm going to say that politically and technically there are some significant challenges I would see with it. See, Paul has his hand raised. I'll cede the floor to Paul.
So I would disagree that I would like to see that outcome. And my reason is that everybody who is in any kind of data path wants to protect it from competitors and wants to engage with it in a compelling way. So if we say, yeah, so stub resolvers ought to reserve certain things and do something with it. I don't know if we have to maybe declare a certain RFC 1918 destination address to say that, okay, you're a stub resolver, you're getting a query, it ends in .foo, send it to this dotted quad, just send the query there and believe whatever you get. Yeah, that's got some security problems, but it opens a can of worms because there is no reason why Apple wouldn't reserve .apple and Microsoft and .azure and Google, and everyone who is in the business of creating stub resolvers would say, well, I see the one you want me to do, but I also see the precedent by which you want me to do it. And I like that precedent because it means I can create a local naming sphere where no matter who your ISP is, no matter what resolver you're using, no matter what corporate name service you might be inside of, our names belong to us. They belong to the operator, the owner, the creator of the stub resolver platform. I don't think any of us, especially not Quad 9, want to live in that world. And so I think what we need to do is to say, if this is going to be done, it needs to be a matter of network policy. And that's indeed what I'm seeing in Glenn's working group right now.
There's an argument that some of the adaptive DNS goes in that same direction. But I would agree with you that that's not a good, that fragmentation is not a good path to take.
Okay, sounds like some food for thought then, guys, in terms of, yeah, maybe there might be an alternate way of solving the same technical problem without the sort of knock-on unintended consequences that Paul and John have just outlined. Yeah, that's been really useful, and that's exactly what I wanted out of this call, was to pick up the stuff which I hadn't picked up on. So thanks very much. I'll give it some further thought, definitely. As I say, the draft referred to the split horizon draft does something similar, but with round trips. So if there's a way that we could improve performance for things like edge computing this way, then great. But that's been a very good illustration of the challenges. So thank you. Brilliant. Thanks, everyone. Right, let's move on then. So we will change from sort of talking about SUDNs on to a discussion about private relay. So let me just find the relevant screen. Bear with me a moment. Right, that's it. The joy of doing this on a smaller than usual screen, which makes it harder to find stuff. Right, there it is. Okay, I'm hoping that a slide has appeared on your screens. Yep, good, excellent, thank you. Right, so this is just a run through to sort of share some thinking around the impact of Apple's recently announced private relay service. Specifically focus on the sort of impact or the implications, if you will, for network operators and ISPs. So it's got a particular slant in this occasion towards that group. So just by way of a quick bit of background, Private Relay, you may recall, is an extension of iCloud Plus. So you have to be an iCloud Plus subscriber to have access to Private Relay. Runs on iOS 15, iPadOS 15, and macOS Monterey. So the sort of very latest versions of the 3 Apple operating systems. It was announced in June at WWDC. And when I send out the slides, if you haven't got it to hand, you'll see on the side there's a link to the presentation, the pre-recorded presentation that Tommy Pauley gave at WWDC to sort of announce Private Relay. And then so we have more technical details made available on this call a couple of weeks or so after that event, when Tommy went through a fairly lengthy list of questions that some of you on this call contributed to. So that's just by way of a reminder as to what what Private Relay is, even. And you may recall, just go back to the diagram, that basically it introduces Oblivious into the equation with so Apple ingress proxies and third parties operating the egress proxies. Depending on user settings, that could be both for DNS, but also for other related services. From memory, I think Apple said all HTTP traffic, for Safari traffic, and certain other apps on the Apple platform, at least to begin with. You can override some of that. So if the user or enterprise has configured a preferred DNS, then as far as I understand it, the DNS won't be routed over Oblivious, but would instead retain the user selected or enterprise selected option instead. So with that brief introduction in mind, just to quickly run through some of the identified operational and other impacts, as I said, for network operators and ISPs. And I should say, again, with the URL on top of the slide, if you want to read about this in more detail, the report's available at that URL, as is the notes of a roundtable discussion where we sort of dug into the sort of details about this as well. So that's all available at that URL. But looking first at the operational impacts, number of different things came to mind. Firstly, in the way that certainly in some markets, regulators define quality of service and network resilience. If Private Relay is switched on, then potentially that would take quality of service and network resilience out of the control of the network operator or ISP. So from their perspective, clearly, then that causes concerns, because if they're measured by a regulator on those matters, but they can't necessarily sort of deliver on them through no fault of their own, then that's clearly going to be troubling for an operator. It also has some implications around network costs. This is specifically because if you switch on a Private Relay, then the sort of routing of the query is determined by the Private Relay service, and it will bypass any embedded CDN cache nodes that an operator has invested. So it will put more traffic off net rather than on net. depending on what assumptions you make about the volume of traffic that will route over private relay, that could be significant. I know, for example, on some some mobile networks in some markets, 50% plus of devices are running iOS. So it's quite a significant volume of devices. I don't know if Apple's ever published any stats on what percentage of its base uses iCloud Plus, but theoretically it could be a significant shift of traffic off net if a large proportion of the Apple base is using private relay. Also, again, this will apply in some markets, not all. If there's network-based content blocking to block access to illegal content, then the use of private relay will bypass that blocking. This is by virtue of using a different DNS, ditto any network-based content filtering. So, for example, if a network's providing parental controls or blocking malicious content, etc., then the use of private relay will bypass that. And then finally, under operational impacts, it will also bypass any zero rating capability that a network operator has. This is more of a concern from an end user point of view, because if a network operator is zero rating, let's say public good content, so for example, COVID related content, health related content, and so that won't count towards a data cap for a user that doesn't have unlimited data. If they access that content through private relay, then in fact it won't be zero rated and it will use some of their data cap. Same if as part of a package, an operator is providing zero rated access to, let's say, Netflix to pluck a service randomly out the air, or other sort of premium content, but zero rated. Then again, if that content is accessed through private relay, then it won't be zero rated. We'll use the percentage of the data cap. Okay, there are also some compliance-related impacts to consider, again, in some markets. Specifically, sort of first couple of bullets there, sort of calling out lawful interception and also data retention and disclosure obligations that some operators will have. On lawful interception, it doesn't appear to impact voice calls, but whether they're routed over, let's say, mobile or indeed Wi-Fi calls, but does affect lawful interception of data traffic. Similarly, to discharge any data retention and disclosure obligations, voice calls seem to be unaffected, but any data sessions the user initiates are not mapped to content. So an ISP can't fulfill any data retention and disclosure obligations. Apple and or its partners would need to be involved in order to discharge that, if it's actually even possible. Similarly, again on compliance in terms of content, so copyright, I should say, not content infringement, apologies, copyright infringement. Certainly, I know in the UK market, in order to require an ISP to block access to copyright infringing content, you have to get a court order, and that specifies which grouping of ISPs are affected by the court order, and that would need to be expanded in scope to include the likes of Apple and its partners to remain effective. And then the third area, just to sort of signpost, is around antitrust impacts. firstly, there do appear to be a potential competitive advantage gained by those vendors that participate as the egress proxy operators in terms of the knowledge of what content is being accessed, not by whom, but at least seeing what content is being accessed, giving them a competitive advantage over their primary CDN rivals. Perhaps more significantly, though, again, depending on what assumptions you make about the size of the of Apple's base that use iCloud Plus, it potentially could see Apple become the largest virtual ISP more or less overnight in terms of the pure scale of traffic that it is able to influence and direct across multiple networks. Certainly, I think you could make an argument about it having significant market power, if not dominant market power, in a fair number of geographic markets. And that's something which I think will bring it into bring it to the attention of, or even more to the attention of, some regulators and legislators in some of those markets. And then also on centralization and control, I think a number of operators are concerned that this will have an impact on peering arrangements, again, because of the shift in how traffic is routed across networks. So that is making some network operators quite nervous in terms of their ability to negotiate the right peering arrangements. The other thing which is quite interesting is the hesitancy of people to publicly say what concerns they have around private relay because of the strength of its market position and sort of nervousness, therefore, about going on the record with any concerns. So that in of itself may well be something that sort of regulators and legislators want to think about, because clearly if people aren't even prepared to say what concerns they have, it makes it quite difficult to sort of surface any issues as they arise. So just in summary, network operators and ISPs do have some concerns. I won't read all that bullet point out loud. You can read it just as quickly yourselves, but I've just sort of rattled through those quite quickly, but broadly around compliance, around antitrust, and around maybe the more fundamental way that the internet model is potentially changed by private relay and potentially competitive services that may follow from some of Apple's rivals over time, as well as it just seems to sort of strengthen further Apple's dominant position. So hence, I lifted this from the report. This is something which potentially regulators and legislators need to give some thought to. And that's a very sort of quick, deliberately sort of a quick run through, just to give you a sense of what came out of the discussion. So let me stop sharing the screen. You'll see the URL again on there for the report if you want to look at it. And let's see what comments or questions people have. And I can see that Gonzalo has put something in the chat. Let me just scroll up to see if I've missed anything, which I haven't. So Gonzalo, so you've posed a question about what is the business model of the egress proxies. And I don't believe anything's been published about that. And as somebody said on the call previously, typically such arrangements will be covered by NDAs. So probably the partners wouldn't be able to say, so it would really be a matter for Apple to comment on should it wish to. I don't know if anyone's seen anything over the last few weeks that gives any detail at all around the business models for egress proxy operators. Taking that as possibly not. Yeah, whether any details will come to light, Gonzalo, I think not sure, given NDAs. So it might be that there aren't the issues about competitive advantage, but of course, until you see the commercial arrangements, it's hard to judge that, whether that's the case. Does anybody else have any questions or indeed comments, or including your own observations about the private relay service? Feel free to jump on should you wish to.
Andrew, this is Zaid. I have a, in the first slide or second slide, when you went over the how private relay works, there's a black box on the right-hand side that said third party. So theoretically, if there were multiple third parties, will some of the points that you brought up on the last slides regarding, you know, I don't want to misquote you, but regarding Apple's market size and so, you know, you have the points in front of you. I'm not gonna butcher them. Will they still hold true if the traffic was distributed across multiple ISPs?
Yeah. So so in terms of the egress proxies, just for clarity, it does say third party. To be fair, it should have been plural third parties rather than third party, because I think at the moment the press coverage suggests there are currently 3 egress parties that have been identified currently operating egress proxies. So it's not a single entity, but I think the issue, Zaid, was more that those parties that operate the proxies will potentially gain competitive advantage over those that don't.
Okay.
Now, whether there are any barriers preventing others from operating those services, well, I don't know. Others on this call may do.
Right.
So depending on what, if any, the barriers to entry that there are, that would, I guess, determine whether that's whether that would mitigate the concerns or not.
Thank you very much. That I understand now. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a fair point, though. Yeah, depending on numbers. And yeah, I think as John has put in the chat, yeah, if the egress proxy operator is a CDN, then clearly for that percentage of the traffic that is routed to their egress proxies, then they can certainly guarantee a better performance to their sort of customer base. So that's, I guess, the potential competitive advantage that they gain, as well as just the sort of intelligence that they are able to glean on the traffic. Any other comments or questions from anyone else? Just give me a chance to think. If not, if you've not had an opportunity to do so, you might find it useful just to dip into the both the report and the associated notes from the roundtable discussion, just to get a sense of more detail, because clearly I've sort of went through it quite quickly to give you a summary, deliberately so. Before I move on, I see Tony has posed a question about how is it different to the VPNs. Let me just, I didn't see your earlier question. Apologies, Tony. So in terms of how is this different to, if you like, a generic VPN, Tony, I think the primary difference is this is a service being provided by Apple itself, because clearly there's a myriad of sort of VPNs on the market. And in fact, there's quite a good article on CNET, which I think gives us some commentary on how private relay differs from VPNs. It doesn't provide all of the same functionality, and it's very much a subset of traffic. But it is an inherent part of the software that ships with the operating system, rather than being an add-on that you have to subscribe to separately. But for more detail, there's I think quite a good CNET article, which I think I'll put a link to it in the sort of weekly highlights earlier today. So have a look in there. You should find that link. If not, drop me a line and I'll send a link out. Okay. Right. Well, that brings us on to any other business. I won't try and keep up with the chat because it's sort of scrolling past, but you can read that at your leisure. And as appropriate, I'll extract any relevant parts and put them in with a link to the call recording as well, so you can peruse them in a more leisurely way if that's useful. So that moves us on to any other business. I should highlight, having seen a couple of reminders over the last couple of days, that if you want to take advantage of registering for ITF 112, the early bird rate finishes at 23:59 UTC tonight. So register now, or it bumps up by, I think it's $50 registration, assuming you're not going for a fee waiver, should you register from tomorrow onwards. I also saw today in the news that apparently sort of travel from Europe to the US is going to open up again for double vaccinated travellers from November. Not sure if a specific date's been published yet, but relatively soon, which is good. So hopefully, by the time we get to whichever it is ITF 114, I think, in Philadelphia, hopefully we will all be travelling again, which will be marvellous. Anyway, does anyone have any other business that you'd like to raise while we're on the call together? And if you do, either raise your hand or pop something in the chat, whichever is easier. I'll just pause for a moment in case you do. Right, I don't see any hands raised, so we'll wind the sort of call down there, and sort of off. We got a sort of presentation lined up next week. I'll put a reminder out later on this week, but it's we got two speakers who will be joining us from Singapore in Singapore time zone. So I think they deserve full credit for being prepared to join. I think it'll be about 11 PM for them to sort of take us through some of the highlights from a paper that they've recently published. But as I say, I'll put a reminder in with the invitation. So thanks everyone for your time this week. Have a fabulous week and enjoy the sunshine, should you be able to catch some before we run out of it for the year. So have a great week all. Speak to you again at the same time next week. Thanks everyone.
Thanks, Andrew.
Cheers, Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.